Thank you to Brilliant.org for sponsoring this video. More on Brilliant later.
How are you? How are you?
We tend to think of the sounds of our native language as precise, distinct objects, and for consonants there's some truth in this. For example, k and m are very different from each other, and it doesn't make much sense to think of something that's halfway between them. But then there are vowels. You may feel that the vowels of your language are just as distinct as the consonants. This feeling is certainly reinforced by alphabetic writing, and that includes phonetic transcription. Visually, letters and symbols for consonants and vowels are equally discrete. These two letters or symbols look nothing like each other. What would a shape intermediate between them look like? Would it have half a dot on top? But the phonetic reality is that vowels are remarkably like each other. They're made with a fairly open vocal tract, and they exist in a single, continuous space. If you take any two vowels, you can move continuously from one to the other, and even stop halfway if you like. Take the E and A of many languages. You can glide between them. E, I. And if you stop halfway between, you'll find yourself roughly at E, You can glide like this between other vowels. Take, say, E and the French type U vowel. E. This means that vowels have a lot in common with colours. We all think of, say, red as one thing and blue as something quite different, but we also know that you can glide smoothly between them, or between any two colours, and nowadays we're very familiar with being asked to choose between a literally infinite variety of continuously related hues. This is the well-known CIE 1931 chromaticity space, which precisely specifies the values of perceivable colours. The curved edge of the roughly triangular shape shows the wavelengths of light that we can perceive. The blue numbers are in nanometers, from longer wavelength red up to shorter wavelength blue. The whole gamut of perceived colour is possible by combining the responses of the three kinds of cones or photoreceptors in the eye. The horizontal x-axis relates to our response to red. The vertical y-axis relates to our response to green, and light with a low response to red and green is perceived as blue. This kind of chart can be used to specify precisely colours that need to be standardised, like for traffic and aviation lights. Now, the vowel space is also roughly triangular, with three maximally distinct corner vowels, E, A, U, and like white on the chromaticity space, we have at the centre the colourless vowel schwa. The three corner vowels also correspond to the three maximally distinct mouth shapes, spread, open, and rounded. The vowel space covers a range of sound wavelengths that we're particularly sensitive to, a range that even old-school telephones could transmit. And the horizontal and vertical dimensions can be associated with resonating cavities in the vocal tract that we lengthen and shorten to adjust those wavelengths or frequencies. I'm simplifying an awful lot here, but if you imagine the vocal tract consisting of a mouth tube and a somewhat longer throat tube, then an E-type vowel is what you get with the shortest oral tube and a long throat tube. You get an A-type vowel with the shortest throat tube and a longer mouth tube. And with both tubes at their longest, you get an U-type vowel. The shorter the tube, the higher pitched its resonance. So an E vowel is a bit like combining a violin and a cello. An A vowel is a bit like two violas, and an U vowel is a bit like two cellos. In reality, it's much more accurate to talk in terms of these resonance pitches rather than guesstimating the size and shape of the vocal tract. To measure the vocal tract, you have to stick things inside the speaker's mouth or lie them in a noisy MRI scanner. But the resonances, which in phonetics we call formant frequencies, can be measured easily from any recording using free apps. And of course these formants are what we actually hear, not tube lengths. So we need to flip the 0 point, and now the vertical axis is the frequency of the lower resonance or formant, F1 for short, which is lowest for U and E and highest for A. And the horizontal axis is the higher of the two formants, F2 for short, lowest for U and highest for E. It's a fun coincidence that the lowest values on both axes give you U on the vowel space and blue on the chromaticity chart. Now, there are also higher speech formants, F3, F4, etc. But they don't play such a big role in differentiating vowels. So measuring F1 and F2 is enough to synthesize intelligible vowels on a computer. They sound a bit Stephen Hawking, but it works. The industry standard speech analysis app is Dutch. It's called Praat or Praat, Dutch for talk. And yes, it's free. It has a vowel editor where you can actually play points in the vowel space aloud. And you can glide around changing the vowel quality the same way you can glide around a colour space changing from one colour to another. It doesn't quite give you the sound in real time, but I can fix that here in editing.
I A O we how are you?
The parallels between colour and vowels go further. Languages can differ both in how many vowels they have and how many basic colour terms they have. Basic colour terms are simple, frequent words like blue and brown, so not emerald or burgundy. For example, a lot of languages have just one basic word covering this whole area. The traditional Japanese word ao was like this, though modern Japanese restricts that word to blue, except it's also used to refer to the go colour in traffic lights. For other greens, Japanese now uses midori, which means roughly leafy. In English, of course, we've got two basic words, blue and green, but Italian and Russian have three words here, with different basic words for what English has to call light blue and dark blue. Italian azzurro and blue, Russian голубой and синий. It's similar with vowels. For example, there are plenty of languages, including Spanish, that have three vowels along the right-hand edge of the vowel space, a, o, u. But there are also languages, including Italian, that distinguish four vowels covering the same space, a, o, u. Of course, we can see the difference between green, light blue and dark blue, even if we don't have distinct basic terms for them. But it can be more challenging to hear vowel contrasts that your native language lacks. There's also the danger of assuming that the same letter or symbol is being used to mean exactly the same shade of vowel. But you can't automatically equate the Spanish and Italian vowels that are usually written with the simple letter O.
Solo. Solo.
Solo. Solo.
Of course, this is a recipe for confusion, and early phoneticians back in the 19th century wanted to establish an international frame of reference for comparing and contrasting the vowels of different languages. But they didn't have 21st century technology. In fact, they didn't have 20th century technology. They fell back on what they felt or thought they felt their mouths were doing, especially their tongues, which wasn't easy considering that vowels are made with a relatively unconstricted mouth. One of the great pioneers was the Scot Alexander Melville Bell, father of the telephone's inventor Alexander Graham Bell. Before they moved to North America, the two of them gave phonetic lecture demonstrations at UCL. Bell Sr. classified vowels in terms of how high or low he felt the tongue was positioned, and how front or back in the mouth. Before long, phoneticians had widely adopted the idea of a two-dimensional tongue space, later diagrammed as a four-sided chart on which any point was intended to tell you how high, low, forwards or backwards the highest part of the bunched tongue body was located. Lining up this tongue space with modern MRI videos, we get something like this.
I, a, o, u. I, a, o, u.
Daniel Jones, the first professor of phonetics at UCL, famously put forward his cardinal vowels. Cardinal in the sense of the 4 cardinal directions on a compass. To this day, the cardinal vowels are taught to phoneticians as reference points. The idea being that you describe any vowel you may encounter by comparing it with the reference vowels. These are Jones's 8 primary cardinal vowels, supposedly lying at equally spaced points around the 4-sided tongue space. But there's something that this chart isn't telling you, namely that the first 5 are unrounded, but the last 3 have rounded lips. The chart can't tell you this because it only estimates tongue position. In fact, the cardinal vowels go progressively from spread to rounded as you go anti-clockwise round the tongue space from E to U. You might well ask why the cardinal vowels do this, when the lips and the tongue are quite capable of moving independently. Now the answer is obvious as soon as we move from the traditional tongue chart to a space that genuinely represents vowel sounds. The primary cardinals actually map out the edge of this auditory acoustic space. Spreading the lips for E shortens the mouth tube and gives us the highest F2 resonance, while rounding the lips lengthens the mouth tube and gives us the lowest F2. And when F1 is at its highest for A, the lips are neither spread nor rounded. The late great phonetician Peter Ladefoged, who founded the phonetics lab at UCLA, where I was a graduate student, expressed this beautifully in his book Vowels and Consonants, which I highly recommend. The early phoneticians were much like astronomers before Galileo. The observations of the early astronomers were wonderful. These astronomers were certain they were describing how the stars and planets went around the Earth, but they were not. The early phoneticians thought they were describing the highest point of the tongue, but they were not. They were actually describing formant frequencies. So it's something of a shock to be reminded that this pre-Galilean view of vowels is the one still promulgated by the International Phonetic Association. The IPA handbook begins its section on vowels with this tongue diagram and says that joining the circles representing the highest point of the tongue in these 4 extreme vowels gives the boundary of the space within which vowels can be produced. Well, that quadrilateral isn't really the space within which vowels can be produced because, for one thing, it ignores the lips. Surely a vowel space is one in which different vowels occupy different places. But any point on the old IPA quadrilateral is occupied by at least 2. Think back to the glide between E and the French type U. We hear something like this in the French for the number 8, 8. We can see this glide and hear it on the Praat Vowel Editor. But now try plotting it on this thing. You can't really because the tongue doesn't move. Daniel Jones gave us this secondary set of cardinal vowels, which are just the primaries with all the lip positions reversed. On the IPA tongue quadrilateral, the 2 sets of cardinals are identical. You can look at this chart till the cows come home and it won't explain why the primaries really are primary, and the secondaries are a weird group including a couple of vowels from RP, a few from French, and one that's impossible, A with rounded lips. Well, maybe you can round it with somebody else's lips. Now on a real vowel space, we find that if we take the primary cardinals and reverse their lip positions, this has the effect of centralizing them. They're less dispersed and so literally less distinct, which explains why they're less common in languages around the world. Of course, in teaching, charts that suggest where a part of your tongue should be do have their uses. But when we produce vowels, it's really hard to know exactly what we're doing. Phoneticians often talk as if they know precisely how their tongue is positioned, but often I'm not sure we do, and we're inevitably guided in part by our ears. When I try to produce a cardinal vowel, I'm torn between trying to implement the articulatory instructions and just trying to make a sound like the one I remember being taught. This is why demonstrations of cardinal vowels, even by top specialists, can disagree.
O,
O, A,
O,
O, oo,
I mean no disrespect to any of those phoneticians. I wouldn't claim to be able to do anything more correctly myself. But modern technology offers the possibility of producing objectively standardized vowels using measurements and speech synthesis. As a rough implementation of this idea, a few years ago I worked out some formant values for reference vowels just by measuring demonstration recordings by Daniel Jones and John Wells. I averaged them and then tweaked the averages to space the vowels out equally. This equal spacing is what Jones originally had in mind, but it's hard to do by ear and pretty much impossible by guessing your tongue position, though it's easy with actual formant frequencies. The chart I ended up with is on my website, and if you click on each symbol, you'll hear the synthesized vowel with the actual values of that point in the vowel space.
E, U, E, E, A, O, U,
Obviously these syntheses are a bit crude, and of course they're very male sounding. But nowadays, as we all know, it's possible to generate artificial speech that's completely lifelike in a range of female and male voices. It's more complex to do than my efforts, but I'm sure that some phoneticians and speech scientists could get together and agree on values or formulas to plot out the vowel space and generate consistent reference vowels in different voices, so we can all be on the same page, like with the colour of aviation lights. I went a step further and stylized my chart on the model of the IPA chart, and this is also clickable on my website.
E, E, U, O, O,
The R coloured vowel, is placed to one side of the main chart. Of course, it's not really possible to plot it on the traditional tongue quadrilateral because it's produced with one of several tongue shapes that aren't consistent with the highest part of the bunched tongue recipe. However, it can be plotted on a real vowel space. I mentioned before the higher formant F3, and what makes distinctive is not one particular tongue shape, but rather a drastically lowered F3. Now it's actually very easy to turn our 2-formant vowel space into a 3-formant vowel space, where F3 is that third dimension. You can see that the vowel E has a somewhat higher F3, so it's perched on a somewhat taller column, but most vowels have relatively similar F3 values. Now our rhotic vowel, has similar F1 and F2 values to schwa, but in the F3 dimension it's much lower than schwa and all the other vowels. As with physical geography maps, 2 dimensions are perfectly adequate most of the time, but now and then bas-relief can be useful. My clickable charts certainly aren't perfect, but at least they're a start. We don't have to be stuck in the 19th century. I think too often people are presented with phonetics that's articulatory approximation and guesswork, when we can get so much more with a little help from science and technology. And that's why I would genuinely love to get more and more of us speech fans to try the courses at brilliant.org. Brilliant has thousands of lessons in science, technology and maths to develop your analytical skills, from graphs, statistics and information theory to search engines, AI, infinity and beyond. And they add new lessons every month at all levels for all ages. With my background in arts subjects, I really value the chance to round myself out. Brilliant's even getting me through my block on algebra. The bite-sized lessons are just challenging enough. They actually feel tailored to me and the time that I can spare. I love the visualizations and the humour and the sheer range. If you'd like more on colour, then the course on quantum objects has a fascinating lesson on colour space that takes you right through to this 3D colour cube. There are probably even more parallels with vowels than I covered in this video. To sample that course or any other free for 30 days, visit brilliant.org/Dr. Jeff Lindsay, or just click on the link in the description below. The first 200 of you will get 20% off Brilliant's annual premium subscription. I recommend it.